Hi, thanks for joining us. We'll just get started here in the next few minutes. Just give a few more minutes for people to join on. Just going to give it another minute or so here as people are sure are hopping on a few minutes late. So we'll get started in the next 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you all for taking the time to join us for the NEDAS seminar series live webinar presented by PCTEL and Day Wireless. Hope you all are enjoying your lovely Thursday afternoon. I know here in Chicago it is quite cold already. We're gearing up for the holidays. But my name is Amy Shavanik. I'm the event director for NEDAS. Just want to take a few minutes here while people are still getting on to first thank our annual sponsors for 2017. As we wrap up this year, we've had great support from our sponsors and hope to continue that into 2018. Now 2018, we have our schedule already prepared, which if you are familiar with NEDAS, there are some changes. So we're getting our save the date out for next year way ahead of time so you guys can plan accordingly. First big change is that we're flipping the New York City and DC symposium events. So to start the year in February, we're going to have the DC symposium. And May 9th, we're actually going to head to Chicago for a social. So again, that's a new event, new location, and we're looking to expand our brand, and you know, that location is one way to do that. On July 18th, we're going back to the Boston Symposium, and then we are finalizing the year with the NEDAS New York City Summit. Other initiatives that we're looking to take in 2018 are we will definitely be doing the NEDAS seminar series again, 6 to 8 seminars. They'll be hosted throughout the year that will be built around the events that we have. Additionally, we're looking to continue to expand and grow and be, again, more of a national brand. So one way that we're looking to do that is to increase our presence within public safety and also increase our end user enterprise members, or enterprise end users. So hopefully those new opportunities will create more opportunities for our attendees and sponsors, and looking into the future and staying ahead of the trend of in-building wireless. So right now we do have our annual sponsorships available. You can contact info@nedas.com if you are interested. There are customizable packages available. My goal is to help you reach your marketing goals. So you know, if that is something you're interested in, please let us know, and we'll get you some more info. All right. Now, again, thank you all for joining us for the Assuring Critical Communications for Public Safety, Supporting the Effort to Verify Indoor Network Performance webinar, which is presented by PCTEL and Day Wireless. Presenting today is Dave Adams from PCTEL. David, in his career, has focused on solutions for service quality and performance management of mobile networks, working closely with the leading U.S. mobile operators to understand their unique needs and requirements led to the creation of patented concepts and approaches. As solutions architect and product manager, he has managed the design and deployment of a number of groundbreaking solutions. Also joining David as a presenter today is Jason Chambers, a service manager from Day Wireless. He is responsible for many key roles and tasks as the CTEC Service Center, which serves the Puget Sound area. Before starting with Day Wireless Systems, Jason served as an active duty in the Air Force for 23 years. Drawing from his background in the U.S. Air Force, Jason made a successful transition to join the service management team at Day Wireless as a CTEC service manager. His background in technical service management includes an approach based on quality operations. He holds the credential of Certified Service Manager through rigorous testing of the Electronic Technician Association International. His roles include general operations, service quality, and project management, with responsibilities for financials, budgeting, and scheduling, with a strong focus on in-building communication systems and public safety communications radio networks. So it's with great pleasure that I now hand it over to David and Jason for the rest of the seminar.
Great. Thanks so much, and thanks to NEDAS for giving us an opportunity to share today. PCTEL is really excited about some new focuses we're doing on public safety. We've had a strong 20-year history of test solutions for wireless, the classical cellular operators, but we're recently really expanding now into public safety. We think we have some good stuff to share. I think you'll find that most valuable information will come from Jason, who has joined us today. So thanks, Jason, for joining us, and look forward to what you have to share today. And really, so just we want to highlight what we're going to address during the course of this next 40 minutes or so. I mean, the biggest thing that we have learned recently, and we've learned a lot from our partners and our customers, is that the demand for assuring that the public safety networks work well indoors is really growing. More and more jurisdictions are starting to focus on it, adopt requirements, and enforce those requirements. And so the second big thing we learned is that there's a real need for more efficient processes and tools to get this done. Right now it's very labor-intensive, manual, it's not real cost-effective. So part of the time I'll spend will be focused on that. But before I get to that part, Jason's going to introduce a lot of us to some of the background, what the requirements are. I'll go over some solution requirements, and then at the end we'll do a case study using a recent solution we launched. Okay, so Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you, bud.
Hey, thanks, David, and thanks to NEDAS for the opportunity to present today. So just in general terms, Day Wireless, the focus for today will be for the greater Seattle market, even though we have executed a number of successful public safety projects across the country. A lot of what I'll be speaking on today will be specific to this area. Some of it may or may not apply to other regions throughout the U.S. So Day Wireless Systems, we have a strong relationship with the emergency responders, first responders, and the public safety communications networks here locally. That being the case, we're in a unique position to help advise and assist on adopting or amending fire code and fire code requirements to meet the jurisdiction's objectives. But one of the things that we face is, or one of the challenges that we face, is helping the fire marshals understand actually how the public safety system works as a whole, and balancing what the radio system needs and what the fire code calls for or should call for. So again, we help the HJs write into the fire code what makes sense, what's testable, and what's feasible and possible. But there are unique differences throughout any jurisdiction in the market that we serve to better meet their needs. Along those lines comes not only educating the HJs, and I'll touch on that a little bit, as well as the building owner. Sometimes building owners find out that they have an emergency responder radio system or a public safety PDA DAS well after the building has been handed over to them, and they don't know that there's a cost associated with the sustainment and compliance of that system. And then we'll also touch on some of the compliance testing challenges that we face here on a regular basis. Next slide. So obviously one of the things that we have to do is stay current, and with the fire codes, fire code amendments, oftentimes when there's a change to the fire code, there isn't notifications that are sent out to building owners or to integrators like us, so we have to seek out that information and stay current on it so that we have a good understanding of what our technicians are supposed to be testing against, and advise our customer base on any changes that may occur and how it may impact coverage testing requirements on a routine basis. Once again, understanding the adopted fire code, what's in it, what the jurisdiction has adopted. Sometimes you'll find it's IFC 2012 in some jurisdictions, 2015 in others, and a bit of NFPA 72 sprinkled in there. We take that, we take a look at how the radio, the public safety radio system operates in that area, and balance that against the fire code requirements. Um, some of the implications of these amendments can have a direct impact on the emergency responders and first responders who actually utilize the system. Some building owners are under the impression, well, if it's for the firefighters, then it's their responsibility. When in fire code it states that it's the building owner's responsibility. So a good example of this is when a local jurisdiction may waive the requirement for testing in residential areas. There isn't really a way when it's recertified for the firefighter to necessarily have confidence that when they go into the residential apartment or condominium, whether or not they're going to have coverage. They do know in the common areas like hallways and those areas that there will be coverage based on the testing, but they may not in the residential areas. Likewise, some fire code even has a requirement that the signage be placed on the equipment room where the head-end equipment is located, as well as fire alarm control panels, so that the emergency responder, when they first arrive, they get some type of notification that the building is equipped with an emergency responder radio system. And once again, all of these requirements will have an impact on the building owners, whether it be the cost for doing the annual certification that's required, or how a system is installed and what type of system is installed. Next slide. So once again, Data Wireless here in SeaTac, Washington, we actually maintain one of the 4 public safety radio system networks. That there's simulcast systems, there's interoperability between these systems, and we maintain the infrastructure that these in-building systems, these public safety BDAs or emergency responder radio systems, that they tie into for donor sites. Now, in a perfect world, all the governmental agencies, and as you could tell from 23 years of experience in the military, I can attest that governmental agencies aren't always on the same page. And what I mean by that is the city radio system managers may not be on the same page as the fire department and or the permitting office if permitting is required for these systems. And that's kind of where we come into play, because we deal with all 3 aspects of that. So that's why it's important for us to help share the knowledge that we have from each one of those departments and explain to the customer this is what's required. Again, on the simulcast and interoperability with other agencies, some fire departments, they just know, hey, my radio works or it doesn't work. They may not always understand that there's interoperability between them and other jurisdictions that may respond to the same area. And likewise, the radio system managers for each one of these donor agencies may have different requirements for the type of system or the pre-testing requirements that isn't identified in the fire code, but is required before you can turn up, quote unquote, turn up or turn on one of these systems and tie it into their donor side. A good example of this is channelized head-in units or BDAs versus and bidirectional amplifiers. Channelized versus non-channelized. We have some jurisdictions that it's written into the code, others that's kind of what you have to know when you're designing, speccing, or testing a system. Far too often folks find that out the hard way because they're going strictly by fire code, International Fire Code, NFPA 72, or it may not be written into the local fire code. Another good example is it's a great practice to perform the isolation testing prior to turnout to prevent interference, because interference from one of these systems can completely blind a donor site and impact thousands of emergency responders all at the same time. So back to the isolation testing, that may be required by some radio system managers before you can turn out, while as others it may not be required. And sometimes, the customer doesn't always understand that that's a requirement, or even the fire inspectors may not realize that that's an additional task or a requirement before we do the HJ walkthrough. And then we go on to coverage testing requirement, what the donor agencies require in uplink testing. By fire code, and speaking of IFC 2015 specifically, signal coverage into and out of the building is required. So uplink testing is a requirement to achieve a neg 95 or dB or greater signal strength at the donor site. The only way to really do that is to have the public safety radio system managers or technicians monitor the uplink testing when you're keying the radio through the BDA system and out to the donor agency and recording those levels. Fire code requires it, and getting documentation from some of the radio system managers as to what the signal strength is can be a challenge. Whereas others, they want a completed copy of the report for their records when the system's been commissioned. Next slide, please. So any specific case that we go out to, one of the first things that we have to take a look at is what fire code is being enforced for ERRS, emergency responder radio systems. It may not be the same as the fire alarm control panels or sprinkler systems. There may be portions that are adopted from NFPA 72, some from IFC 2015. So knowing that before you go in is always important, so that you make sure that you have the right techs assigned and the right expertise available. Again, I speak to the blended requirements. We have one jurisdiction that has blended requirements and then their own local requirements, such as like a 40 grid, the signage that I mentioned earlier. So compliance requirements for coverage testing. Some jurisdictions may require a 20 grid test, 40 grid test, NFPA 72, depending on the size of each one of the floors, the types of overlays, and some of them are very particular around here, where they want to see the actual signal strength inside the grid square and not just a pass fail and then a separate sheet that identifies which grid passed and which grid did not pass. Again, some of the jurisdictions have waived coverage testing for residential areas only for annual certifications, not for the initial acceptance testing. And there are some unique differences between acceptance testing requirements versus annual certification requirements. One of the commonly missed areas is the system is supposed to be tested under backup power, backup battery for a certain length of time depending on fire code, to ensure that it will still continue to operate in the event of loss of power. Some areas may identify critical areas and they may define them. A good example is 99% coverage in the critical areas like pump houses, fire alarm control panel areas, elevator lobbies, stairwells. And looking at it closer, 99% coverage, if there's only a single grid square, what do you mean by 99% coverage? Do you want that grid broken down separately? Or what are you specifically looking for? So that's where oftentimes we have to go back to the individual fire inspector themselves to make sure that we're on the same page and we're testing it in compliance with their spirit of intent. And also, same holds true for the backup power. Some buildings are equipped with emergency generator, and testing under generator conditions can impact the entire facility. So making sure that the building owner is aware of the requirement and does it make sense? Is this the spirit of intent for the fire inspector? In some cases, when the generator checks are done for the building, if there's a code requirement for that, we'll also be conducting our annual certifications at the same time. Bottom line here is know the code, know what you're getting into before you go out or your techs go out to do the compliance testing, whether it be acceptance certification or annual certification. As you can see, each HJ can have stark differences in requirements, and sometimes it depends on the inspector. I'm sure each of you can attest that some inspectors are a little more difficult to deal with than others. Likewise, know the differences between what would be required for new construction or retrofit if a system needed to be replaced, or if it's an existing building that needs to have a new system put into it. That's a trend that we're seeing a good bit of. Some existing buildings that are even historical, that have been around for a long time, requiring systems to be installed due to the size of the building. And likewise, same old's true for the annual recertification. How often it's performed, how it's performed, and when it can be performed. And going along those same lines, what's required by the AHJ, fire code, and/or permitting. And permitting comes into play because some areas have specific requirements for emergency responder radio systems, where you have to pull a permit specifically for that, and it doesn't fall in line with the electrical permit. In some cases, you may have to do like a baseline, organic, or benchmark coverage test and provide that, as well as blank overlays and grid plans, test plans, before you can even pull a permit to install the system. Again, some permits may require 20 grid, some may require a 40 grid in order to get fire final sign-off. Again, the critical areas, donor signal strength. It's not uncommon to see some jurisdictions require donor signal strength, or voice quality checks. We've only seen voice quality checks in a few areas, but I can see where that's going to be a growing need. They want to see whether or not the audio quality or signal and the noise ratio is acceptable. And you can always run into the case where the fire code permitting and then the actual RFP or contract requirements are very different. We just ran into this recently where there's a bunch of additional testing that was required that was outside of the fire code or what the permitting for that particular project required. That was fine. It's common, like I mentioned in here, with the voice quality testing, but knowing that before you go in and ensuring that the contract requirements don't contradict what's required by fire code. Some folks who are designing the systems or speccing the systems for us to bid upon may not fully understand, and I'm dealing with that right now with one that I was quoting earlier today, where the contract requirements contradicted fire code significantly. So you have to go back and ask, the questions to make sure that everybody's on the same page and comparing apples to apples. And ultimately, assigning resources, whether it be the equipment that we use for the testing or the personnel that we use for testing. A good example is 700 and 800 systems, testing both of those at the same time. Do the technicians have the right qualifications for the test equipment or the code that they're testing against? And finally, making sure that the technician understands which code that has been adopted and that they're going out and doing the testing against. Next slide. So again, it's important that the technicians, the HJs themselves, the fire inspectors, and the building owners stay current on fire code and the requirements. Again, rarely do the HJs or the local governments notify the building owners that there's been a change to the fire code. And unfortunately, the fire inspectors may not always know what the spirit of intent or what's required in their own local fire code. It can change, and it can change quickly, and unfortunately they may not fully understand what those changes impacted or what they're looking at. So that's where what we call HJ walkthroughs, that's where that can be most helpful in helping educate the fire inspector, the building owner, and the technician themselves on the fire code requirements, pass or fail, and what this really means at the end of the day. HJ walkthroughs and having the technicians and the customer, we did one yesterday, pretty extensive tunnel project, and it was great to have the customer there so that they had a good understanding of what they were getting, how the system was performing, and the HJ, so that he knows, or he or she knows, when it comes time for recertification, they know where everything's located at, and they know how it's supposed to work. Next slide. So some of the challenges that we run into when we have to gain access into residential areas, coordination and careful coordination is a challenge. We found where if we can provide the customer with sample grids so that they can help pinpoint which residences need access and which ones do not, that can be helpful. Oftentimes, another challenge that we run into is, we're the bearer of the bad news. Our technicians are the ones that are on the ground doing the testing. They bring back the results, and the system may be found to be not compliant. Either fire code has changed, or the system isn't performing, or as it was designed, or maybe the acceptance testing in some cases wasn't ever really performed. Another challenge is having the certification of resources, and that's equipment and personnel. So by Fire Code 2015 is another good example. Certifying officials for these reports and for the testing are required to have an FCC general radio telephone operator's license, or commonly referred to as a GROL, as well as having an equipment certification for the system that's installed and been optimized and commissioned. And then ultimately shaping the data so it makes sense for the HJ and the customer. Once again, a good example of that is what we're able to do with the test reports is show and give the emergency responders and the fire inspector the confidence that this system is operational and will work upon demand. Shaping that data so that they don't just see a bunch of numbers or a bunch of colors, but understanding how the system was tested, what was used for the testing, and how the system is performing. It's possible to have, although we don't like to see it, according to fire code, there could be failed grid squares. So it's important for them to know what areas where they may have potential challenges with their radios, and that's good information for them to have in hand. We leave copies of our reports with the system itself, so that if there is an area that they won't have communication in, they're aware of it, in a time of crisis. Next slide, please.
Jason, thanks so much. Every time I hear you talk, I learn something. So I appreciate you joining us here and covering that. I know there's a lot of information there, and so I appreciate it. So what I'm going to do now for the next 10, 12 minutes is kind of focus very specifically on what are some of the test challenges as it applies to verifying that indoor coverage, as Jason covered. When you talk about being able to know, what do you have to do to be able to prove that coverage is good enough, report it in such a way that you'll be able to successfully get your occupancy permit. Based on those challenges, what's the right test tool? What characteristics, what requirements are being driven onto the test tool? And I'm going to use the recent release we have of our solution to try to illustrate some of those aspects. Okay, so first thing I want to highlight is the fragmented requirements. One of the things that should stand out from Jason's presentation is the fact that there are many, many parties that kind of have their hand in the till, so to speak, if you want to say it that way. So you have these national organizations that make specification recommendations, so the NFPA and ICC, and then of course you have the jurisdictions that adopt some form of that, but there's all sorts of other influencers there. For instance, the fire marshals, all the people in the fire departments and the police departments have some kinds of input into what gets adopted. The people who run the radio system, and as Jason pointed out, their requirements for making their radio network work well may not be perfectly aligned or have 100% overlap with the fire code requirements or the local requirements. And so an organization that's being asked to come in and verify this and report on it has to really be able to adapt to this very fragmented environment. There's numbers of bands that are covered in public safety across the country. There's different ways to implement your radio system. Particularly if you throw in things like simulcast, is there a control channel on all the time or not? Are groups of channels used? So there's this really rich set of various requirements that the ideal tool really has to address a superset. So if you want something that's useful in any of the jurisdictions you're going to be applied to, you need to make sure you've got this broad set of capabilities to address that. And then this next one is, of course, time to finish or time to complete. One of the biggest things that we've learned as we got associated with people like Day Wireless and many of our other customers is that there's this very time-consuming process. You've got to set up for the test and prepare, draw grids on floor plans, decide where you're going to test, and then you're going to do the test process. And if it's not very automated, if it's any kind of manual stuff, that takes a long time. And then there's also this big back-end time to take the raw data and shape it into a useful report. So, the ideal tool wants to kind of shrink the times for all that. Jason will give you a little, at the end, we'll give you a case study. But, the goal would be to try to do this in 20, 30% of the time that you're normally doing so you can be much more cost-effective. Does it require 2 people or 3 people to go out and execute the test? Jason will tell a story about, having to have multiple people in the car to do something if you're driving in a tunnel, whereas, can you shrink that down by 1 or 2 people? And you really want to be able to set this stuff up quickly. You want to say, put grids on floor plans, identify critical areas. Where am I going to test outside to make sure I know what the loss is from outside to inside? And then, of course, the reporting is the same way. How easy is it to adapt a report so it reflects people's different thresholds or different jurisdictions, what their pass-fail criteria are? So, again, you got to have a rich set of capabilities to really effectively to meet the requirements here. One of the other points about this is the ability to actually get those reports generated automatically. And in fact, one of the things that we really thought was important that we added in our tool is that the report is constantly updating. So as you go through the process of testing a floor, test from area to area in the grids, you get a real-time update of how you're doing. Are you passing? Let's say you realize pretty quickly that this floor is not going to pass, this building's not going to pass. You're going to know it very quickly because the report's updated. And it can save you a lot of time saying, I don't need to finish the test, it's time to go stop and troubleshoot or fix something. So again, you really want to use your personnel efficiently. One aspect of this is the test setup may be a little bit more complicated because you've got to adapt for a jurisdiction's individual requirements that differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But on the other hand, when you send your tester out, you don't want to have to send out your most skilled or your most proficient guy. You want a very easy test execution, point, click, everything works quickly. And then, of course, on the back end, if you generate the report automatically, it saves a lot of time and effort from your skilled personnel who have to approve and sign off that the testing and the reporting was done accurately because you're going to have to stand by it. So again, you'll see illustrated there at the bottom some of the things we've put into our tool to allow you to quickly and easily set the test up, very easy point-and-click test, and automatic report generation. Another aspect of this is making sure that you've got the right set of tools to put this solution together. There's some very important factors, like oftentimes you get a lot of value as the one who's responsible for doing the testing if you can combine multiple things at a time. So a tool that actually has the capability to do a full walk test on a path versus one that does a grid test. You might also at times need to be driving outside to test the outdoor network. There's oftentimes, even though you've got a high-speed scanning receiver to make the measurements, you also need to use a spec-in. So if you had a spectrum analyzer built in to one tool, now you have a lot of the things all together in one platform. There's one to learn, one to maintain, one to to learn how to use and be able to not have to carry as many tools with you. So again, our solution is focused on putting all those things together. They're all one touch away from each other. You can switch from grid test to your spec-in to look for problems and go right back to your grid testing very easily, all built into one tool. Okay. The heart of our solution is something that's really important, is getting a high-speed, accurate scanning receiver that can measure X number of channels. If you have 10, 15, 3 or 4 bands, whatever you've got, you can be able to set those up and make quick measurements within seconds at each of the areas in the grid you need to test. Or, of course, if you're walk testing, you're getting a smooth set of measurements everywhere. One of the other big aspects of a good solution is being able to tightly integrate with your design tool. Oftentimes, in many organizations, the people who are designing an indoor system to make sure the network works well, you're putting a BDA in or some kind of DAS. The design people aren't always closely working with those who have to assure that the DAS got built properly, that the goals were achieved, that you got good coverage. So really what you want is a test solution that is very tightly coupled with your design tool. And that means 2 things. One is getting the design information into the hands of those doing the actual testing, the collecting of measurements, so that you have everything available and you can have reference material that tells you what do you expect to see here, what antennas, what BDAs. And then the second part of that is once you've made those measurements, getting them easily and efficiently back to the designer, so the designer can now have real-life measurements to check with his predictions, to compare how well the prediction's working, to tweak the design to make sure you've addressed everything, because you want all this stuff working before you ever call out your AHJ for your walkthrough. So really tight coupling between, in our case, we work closely with IB-Wave. One-touch integration back and forth between us is really driving efficiencies in how the design process and the test process is working. So really, just to kind of summarize, what's required of an ideal test solution to satisfy this indoor test requirements. So you want a lot of automation in setting up the test, executing the test, and creating the reports. You want it as easy as possible, so you don't have to necessarily spend your best skilled guys doing it. Sometimes you can delegate that down and have it being reviewed and improved. The heart of the system of an ideal solution is fast, accurate measurements. So if you have 10 to 20 channels you need to measure, they're all measured quickly within a very short few seconds, and they're done accurately. So you want equipment that's like specified and got published specifications on accuracy. And you want to make sure that you've got a good measurement device that's consistent. It's been validated. It makes the same measurement at the same time, in the same place, the same way. Light. One of the things people love about the solutions we bring to market is it's a Bluetooth between a measurement device and a tablet. No cables. Very light. Be able to carry it on your back. Be able to work all day without fatigue. So ergonomics is critical. And again, like we mentioned, effective use of your personnel. Maybe you can leave your skilled guys at home so they can be checking the data as maybe a less skilled guy is out doing the measurements, and they can automatically check one another and look at the data and see what needs to be redone or investigated for troubleshooting. Future-proof is critical, so you want equipment that can handle any of the needs you'll go into. One of the things that Dave Wireless was most attracted to was the fact that they have a strong focus on public safety, but they're starting to do more and more in cellular. And if you have a solution that will do cellular and public safety and private radio all at one time, so now you can go out and do a project, and at the same time as you're doing public safety checks, you can also do a cellular check or a private two-way network, radio network check. And so now you really leveraged the efficiencies that you get from a solution like that. When it comes to FirstNet coming around, so you want tools that already do the LTE and allow you to do the same kind of validation with cellular as well as P25, and you want a partner who's got a strong reputation of working closely with the requirements, so that every time I come back from visiting Jason, I've got 2 or 3 new things to add into the roadmap for the next release of our solution, and that's really what drives the ability to get the most out of a solution. And that's really what you want when you come to look at how am I going to get this testing done, how is it going to be done effectively and cost efficiently. So Jason, I want to give you a few minutes now here at the end to kind of cover your case study and how things went with your testing. So go ahead.
Sure, David, thanks. So this is a little background on this. This is 800 megahertz public safety and 700. This is a system that was designed around 5 different donor agencies. Very unique, first of its kind that we've had a hand in. Has some unique challenges, as you can tell, with 5 different donor agencies. We had 4 head-end units that were then sent out through a fiber DAS up to 3 different fiber remotes, sister tunnels. So there's 2 tunnels that were very similar in design. There were some unique differences, specific to coverage areas and that kind of stuff. But like I said, very similar. We did our traditional method, and then most recently for the second tunnel, we just finished up with that using the PCTEL equipment, and I sure wish we would have had it when we did the first part of the testing. So I'll cover all of that along with what a compare and contrast, the man-hour consumption and how we used our time, the accuracy of the data, and then the post-processing of the data. Next slide, please. So again, 2 sister tunnels, 3 lanes of traffic, eastbound, westbound. When I say lanes, I don't mean individual roads. I mean there was 4 lanes, eastbound, westbound, and then an HOV lane. Road, for those of you that haven't done that type of testing, road tunnel testing is quite challenging, especially in a major metropolitan area like Seattle. So 2 independent public safety PDA DAS systems fed by 5 donor systems, meaning 1 for one tunnel, 1 for the other. We had to do baseline testing with the system off, or organic testing, as it's referred to, as well as fire code compliance testing, and that's where we use the PCTEL here to do that. So for the first round of testing, Tunnel 1, it required 3 techs, 5 test devices, 1 for each one of the donor agencies, and 2 shifts of personnel. Key point to this one is when we did this testing, because of how long it takes to get the donor signal strength, we needed to have a lane closure. So, David mentioned that there was 3 of us that was in the vehicle just recording the signal strengths for each one of the donor agencies. There was also a lead and trail safety vehicle that was required in a lot of grumpy commuters, needless to say. There's 2.
I'm glad I wasn't there.
Yeah. So there was 1 shift that was performed during high traffic hours during the day, and then in the evening time, that was when we did the HOV in the opposite lane. Overall, 36 man-hours were consumed for the testing. We manually recorded over 600 signal levels, all handwritten, and that's for both the baseline and the compliance testing. Then you have Tunnel 2. We didn't have to do any speed calculations to figure out how long we would, or how slow we would have to drive through the tunnel. So that made me very happy. So Tunnel 2, we had 2 techs, One was a driver. The other one was just operating the PCTEL. We call it a test suite. Single shift with no lane closures. We did do it during a busy time of the day so that we could drive slow and not have too many angry commuters and people calling in saying we're causing traffic delays. Safety vehicles and personnel leading trail were not required, which saved the overall project a great deal of money there. And we consumed, between the two techs, 7 total man hours for the on-site coverage testing. Once again, over 600 signal levels were auto-recorded for the test grids. So we didn't have anybody trying to figure out whether it was a 7 or a 1 on any of the grid squares, or a 81 or an 87. Also, the post-processing of the data for report generation was simplified significantly. On the back end, Tunnel 1, we used 20 administrative hours for the report generation, for the fire code compliance report, the acceptance test report. And the quality of the data was good, and the reporting met the fire code requirements and the contract requirements. It met it. We were able to meet what was required, and everybody was pleased. Tunnel 2, on the other hand, 8.5 total man hours, and the quality in reporting was really well and above in the way that the data was shaped. And I guess that's the best way to say it, is the fire marshal, the fire inspector, the end customer, who was a transportation customer, obviously, everybody was very pleased with the quality of the report and having the ability to understand what was actually in the report. So needless to say, gained a ton of efficiencies, saved a bunch of time. You can see for yourself what the differences between the two tunnels were. Not to mention the techs really enjoyed using the PCTEL gear and that single phase. Nobody wants to come in and work a night shift to do that kind of testing, and we were able to get it through, get it processed, and get the actual compliance walkthrough scheduled much quicker.
Great.
And like I say, happy HJ makes the customer awful happy.
All right, great. Well, Jason, thanks so much. Appreciate you having joined us today. So we'll turn it back over to NEDAS at this point and give everybody a chance to see if there's any questions that we can field for you, or any other kinds of materials we can cover in the few minutes we have remaining.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you both so much for presenting today, and it was a really great presentation. We are going to take the last 10 minutes to field any questions. So if you do have questions, there should be an area that you can type them and send them my way, and I'll be asking the team. Also, just a quick note that we will be sharing this webinar and the presentation with all of the attendees. So you will be receiving a copy of this, and it will also be made available on our website. So just be on the lookout for that. So the first question came during your presentation, Jason, and it's, how do you find the local AHJ?
A lot of that's through relationship building. One of the key points that we have if we're designing a system, installing a new system, is finding out which fire department or inspection division that particular property falls under, because sometimes the customer is really not sure, and then we reach out to the local government and kind of track that down to find out who the inspector is and get in touch with them. Since we've been doing this for quite some time, chances are we may actually reach out to another inspector to find out who covers a certain property.
So Jason, if you were going into a brand new area, you didn't have established relationships, and you had to find somebody, what kind of job titles or organizational groups would you look for to go chase this down?
So we do have a couple of instances with jurisdictions outside of this area. Not a couple, we've got several, but here most recently we reached out through in Arizona. We did a quick search, found out where the the fire code, what the local fire code was, what they had adopted. Quick Google search, Google being your friend, and oftentimes there's a point of contact, or at least a division contact that's out there. So you call up, let them know, and it's always helpful if you kind of explain what your experience and your background with these types of systems are in order to get your questions addressed. Most are delighted that you're reaching out to them on the front end and not when it's time to actually get the walkthrough completed.
Yeah, great.
Okay, great. The next question came in, David, during your presentation, and the question is there a favorite/dominant coverage test software suite, grids, reports, etc.?
Well, ours. Maybe the question needs to be clarified a little bit, but in other words, so one of the things that we found, and just maybe a quick story and a background. So we have a very strong presence in the cellular market. So, all the major carriers in the U.S., most of them around the world, use our scanning receiver in some way or form, either directly from us or through some partners that that integrate our scanner. And so when we started to hear about public safety test requirements, whether you're talking about outdoor, which we didn't cover much today, or the indoor, which we were kind of focused on, there was a lot for us to learn. But one of the things that I was most striking to me was how most of the people were doing it in a very manual process. They were carrying either radios from the HJs or carrying, some kind of a regular, measurement receiver, spectrum analyzer. There was a lot of paper, there was a lot of handwriting, a lot of transcribing, hand drawing of grids, manual production of reports. So really, that's kind of what we focused on. Is it's not rocket science in like my daughter studies. It's really just watching what's done in the manual process and finding an easy way to automate the creation and setup of the test, the actual execution, and then the reporting. So I think we've got a fairly unique solution today in the market, and we hope to really continue to grow that. We've got a number of releases planned to kind of enhance additional value of what you can get out of the tool. But if that's what they're asking, I don't know that there's many others out there other than what we bring to market called Seahawk Touch. I think there's some out there, but I think we have a lot of unique features, really.
Okay, great. Anyone else have any other questions? Please feel free to type them here in the next minute as we finish up here. While we wait for any other questions, I just again want to say thank you both for taking the time and contributing here. I think it definitely helps our community and helps us grow, and I hope that everyone who did attend learned something new today. As I mentioned, that we will be sharing the presentation with you and a thank you eBlast, so that's the way it will come, but we also will get it up on the NEDAS website. If you have any questions, the contact information is currently on your screen for David and Jason, but also feel free to reach out to info@nedas.com if you have any questions for our NEDAS team. So with that, I don't see any other questions. So thank you guys. David, Jason, thank you again.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah,
wonderful.
Thanks for PCTEL. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. You guys have a great afternoon, and we'll talk soon.
All right, thanks.